Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with the Haydn Symphony Crusade. And we're up to Symphony number 55, Der Schulmeister, the Schoolmaster. Now, let's face it, that isn't exactly a title that's going to endear audiences to the work. I mean, who wants to hear something that's like schoolmasterly? You know, it gives you this sense of some sort of finger-wagging pedant, and as it turns out, no one's quite sure why the title Schoolmaster, or how exactly, let's put it that way, that it applies to this particular work. There's an early manuscript that refers to the slow movement as the Schoolmaster in Love. And it actually works out rather well in a comedic kind of way, if you think about it, because what you'll hear when we get to it is a movement in variation form in which an almost didactic, very dry kind of theme alternates with sort of gusts of passion that, well, they don't always last very long because the schoolmaster is not exactly the most suave and sophisticated type with the ladies. Let's put it that way. And when you think about it that way, and then you listen to the music, all of a sudden you go, aha, I guess they're right. I guess that is what it does. But that is what the music does. There's no question about it. And we're going to get to that in a moment. But before we even do that, I want to talk about general form of this particular symphony because it's fascinating, absolutely fascinating. And we have to move way ahead of Haydn in the 1770s, which is when this piece was written, probably thereabouts, and jump to his pupil, Beethoven, and specifically the Eroica Symphony. Now, Beethoven's Third Symphony, the Eroica, is constructed around an enormous funeral march. I don't think anybody would dispute that. That's the emotional core of the Eroica, and it's a very grim march-like piece. And because it's so big and because it's so march-like, Beethoven takes great pains to try and offset it with contrasts in the other movements, contrasts particularly of rhythm, of meter, because that funeral march is just 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2 for 15 minutes. And for that reason, he writes a first movement which is actually in 3/4 time. Now, for those of you who know your rhythms, triple meter, that is a rhythm of 3 in a bar, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, that's waltz tempo or minuet tempo. And for a piece the size and severity and importance and revolutionary character of the Eroica, to suggest that the first movement has the lightness and lilt of a waltz would be kind of heretical. People would point at you and say, no, you don't know what you're talking about. But it does have that kind of swing. And music in triple meter, that is 3 beats to the bar, that 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, it has a certain lift that you don't hear from march tempo, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. You hear the difference? And Beethoven obviously wanted that first movement to have an extra impulsiveness, but he had a problem. So if he chooses triple meter, waltz tempo, a waltz-like rhythm, how does he get have his cake and eat it too? Let's put it that way. How does he get the impulsiveness, the forward motion, the drive of a dance movement, but without making it sound trivial or just dancey, or like a little waltzy minuet-y thing? Well, the way he does it is by writing themes which, as soon as they pick up the rhythm of the waltz, the opening theme, dum ba da 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 da, right? 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1. All of a sudden, there's syncopation, and all these things start happening that disrupt that rhythm. He gets the forward motion, the feeling of the motion, but then writes tunes and accompaniments and rhythms that happen on not the first beat of the measure, 1, 2, 3, but on the second beat or the third beat, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Whatever he can do to obliterate that sense of waltz, but not obliterate that forward motion of being in triple time. And that creates a wonderful contrast with the big march, which follows next. Now, you may say, Beethoven was an unbelievable genius, and he came up with this fabulous concept of getting, a very impulsive and energetic and exciting first movement, followed by a march. Well, this is exactly what Haydn does in this symphony. That's why I was talking about Beethoven, because what you'll hear is Haydn, let's put it this way, Beethoven using Haydn's technique, not the other way around. Haydn using Beethoven's technique. You have the Schoolmaster second movement. Da, 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 bum, 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 bum. It's just 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2. Second movement, but the first movement is in waltz tempo. To 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, just like Beethoven does in the Eroica Symphony. It's the same concept. And that's what I want you to get your brains around. Beethoven, of course, is operating on a huge scale, a much bigger scale than Haydn is in this symphony, this charming, witty little symphony. It's just delicious and absolutely wonderful. But the idea of contrast and how that contrast is achieved is absolutely identical between the two works. And I think that that's a really important lesson, because you find that artists generally, in order to achieve certain effects of contrast and balance, resort to the same methods or very similar methods. So let's begin with the exposition of the Schoolmaster Symphony, just the first section, and you'll hear how Haydn constantly breaks up this idea of waltz tempo, this 3/4 time, this 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3 rhythm. He begins in the most devastating way possible by having an opening that's 4 repeated notes, not 3. Bum, 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 bum. That's the opening. 1, 2, 3, 4. Well, that right away tells you you're not in waltz tempo, right? Because waltzes don't do that. And then you have the waltz-like tune, da, 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 which gives you that motion, that feeling of lilt, of forward movement that you get from triple time. And then the whole orchestra breaks in with another rhythm that disrupts completely the idea of the waltz. Bum ba-dum, bum ba-dum, bum ba-dum, bum bum bum. So it's Beethoven's method, which is really Haydn's method. So the other thing I want you to keep in mind is the very end of the exposition. There's a tune there that's going to be very important, and I'll tell you about it after we hear the exposition. So here it is. This is the, I think, the Northern Chamber Orchestra under Nicholas Ward or somebody like that, on Naxos. One of those people, I can tell you right away what it is because I have it right here. Yeah, the Northern Chamber Orchestra under Nicholas Ward on Naxos. So let's listen to the exposition of Haydn's Schoolmaster, keeping in mind that you're really in waltz tempo all the while. Now, wasn't that interesting? Did you hear what I was talking about? And even though there is a definitive second subject, that is a really distinctive second theme or tune, you hear so many different rhythmic ideas in just this exposition, because Haydn is constantly interrupting this idea of waltz, so that it doesn't sound too waltzy too soon, because he's going to write a minuet after the slow movement, which is going to be quite minuet-like. Let's put it that way. If not waltzy, it's minuet-y, which is almost the same thing. So there you have it. Now, at the end of the exposition, you hear a what we call a cadence theme or closing theme, an idea that's going to bring the thing to the end. And I want you to pay really close attention to it. Here it is. It's tiny, 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 5 seconds or so. It's virtually nothing. Interesting, huh? That's it. That's the closing theme. But one of the other remarkable things about this symphony, which you will note right away when you hear the next section, the development section, is that that's the most important theme in the development section. It tells us another really important lesson in Haydn's vision of symphonic form, which is this. Even though there are two major areas of thematic activity in your typical sonata form movement, which is what this movement is. It's in sonata form. That is, it has an exposition that reveals the tunes or the subjects of the movement, a development section that does stuff with them, and then a recapitulation that repeats the music from the opening, but does so in a way that keeps it in its home key, so that it gives a feeling of arrival and finality at the end. That's sonata form. But you don't have to use what is formally the first tune and formally the second tune, or first subject and second subject. These subjects can contain any number of ideas. And as you already heard in this exposition, Haydn filled this first subject with different rhythms and different volume and dynamics and things and stuff, all to create energy and forward drive without being a waltz. And the same thing happened in the second part with the second subject, which is more lyrical and graceful, maybe a little bit more lilting. But then there's that really exciting end to the exposition. And it is the end of the exposition, the least likely tune in the whole freaking movement, that Haydn spends most of his time dealing with in the development section. So a development can do anything. Haydn can do anything. That's what's so great about Haydn, of course, is because he does do anything in his development sections, in where you least expect it. And it's fabulous how he uses that little tiny theme at the end of the exposition as what I call motion music, as a way to drive the music forward from one of the bigger and more important, theoretically more important ideas to the next, because they're all there. They're all in the development section, but they all have a different purpose. They all have a different meaning, a different character. Like that lyrical second subject becomes very sad and pensive in the development section. You only hear it once in a minor key. And the opening, all those different ideas, the dum-ba-da, dum-ba-da, and the four-note jump, 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 and all that stuff, it gets all mixed up in different order as that wonderful little tune from the end of the exposition sort of pushes everything along toward the recapitulation, the return of the opening theme. So let's now listen to the development section. Oh, wow. Well, you know what? Let's listen to that little tiny themelet at the end of the exposition first, one more time, just so you get it in your head. You'd think it means nothing. But wait, here we go, the development. See? Hear it? You can tell. It's wonderful. It's just one of those fabulous things. And from there on, you can do the rest of the movement by yourself, the rest of the symphony by yourself if you want. But that gives you a really good sense, I think, of how fabulous Haydn is as a symphonic thinker, as somebody who can make things out of his material, who works with it in unexpected and always fresh and exciting ways. Now, the second movement, the Schoolmaster in Love, if that's what it is a theme and variations, but it's not your average theme and variations. Haydn is so original in what he does. There is a fascinating performance practice issue with this movement that I have to spend a moment talking about, and that's this. It's marked semplicemente, which I think is what it's called here. Let me make sure I'm not screwing this up. It's an andante, yes. Adagio, pardon me. Ma semplicemente. Simple. Simply. Now, semplicemente means something very specific in the language of the time, musically speaking. It means do not ornament the melody. Meaning, if you're playing a soloist, don't add ornaments, don't do things with it while you're playing your solos. But it also means, in this particular context, quite likely, we think anyway, that strings, because all the strings are playing together, they're not going to ornament individually while they're all playing the same thing together. That would sound horrible, although they did do it in those days. People did. We have evidence of that. But basically it means for the strings, don't use vibrato. Do not embellish the melody by using that wonderful technique that makes the sound warm and songful. He wants it to be dry. It's the schoolmaster, remember. He's dry, he's pedantic, he's didactic. And so the first statement of this variation melody is as dry and uninteresting and emotionally neutral as he can make it. But then the repeat of it is marked dolce. Dolce means sweetly. And that means, yes, play it with vibrato, play it with warmth, try and add a degree of human feeling and passion to the music. And this entire movement alternates between semplice and dolce, and other things too, dolce and tenuto, which means hold it. And that also means to use vibrato if you're a string player. There are a whole bunch of things Haydn does that tells the orchestra when to turn on and turn off this vibrato technique, which all string players use anyway, as a matter of course. And actually to have none at all, ever, is quite rare. But to make it especially dry, Haydn writes a theme which is played staccato initially in short note values with da, 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 bum, 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 ba, like that. So that you don't have room to do anything that's warm and lyrical. And you just listen to the alternation. Now, most variation movements, and that's what also makes this an interesting one, begin with themes that have two halves, and both halves are repeated. And then when you go to the variations, they vary each half of the theme. But there is another technique of variation where the repeat of the half of the theme is also varied. When that happens, it's called a double variation, in case you care. But the normal structure in letters would be A, A, B, B. And if you had double variations, it would be A varied, B varied. That's the way Haydn starts out this theme. In other words, semplice and then dolce with the same thing repeated and already varied in its more human form. And then the second half is also B and then B dolce, B varied. And so you can hear the difference. He wants you to hear it right away. This difference between this dry, pointed, sort of, pedantic, simple rhythm and the more flowing, lyrical, passionate form of the melody. Then the first variation is a normal variation. It's A, B, B. And then the first one comes back. And again, it's one of these double variation type things as they come back. So it's a very, very interesting movement structurally. And when you listen to it and get to know it and get to know the form of the whole thing, it's really very, very interesting to hear how Haydn creates this alternation between our boring little dull schoolmaster and his perhaps hapless, unsuccessful attempts to woo his beloved, if that's what's going on. So let's listen to the theme. And remember, each repetition of the half of the theme is going to be varied in the dolce manner, in a way to make it more lyrical and songful. So that's the theme. And after that, well, sky's the limit as to what Haydn can do in order to create emotion. He's trying to create emotion. The schoolmaster isn't very good at expressing emotion, actually. I want to play the second variation as well, because the second variation has these gusts of passion, you would call it. Da-da-dum, bum, dum, dum. Wow! Yes, his heart opens, but only for a moment. And this is a variation where both halves of the theme are identical. Here it is. Just give it a listen. So that's the schoolmaster in love. And so the rest of the movement goes on in that fashion, alternating semplice, that is relatively passionless and unemotional, with music of increasing poignancy. And you can decide for yourself how it all ends up. It's absolutely delightful. And by the way, it's a movement which gives lie to the period instrument movement contention that vibrato was only used ornamentally and never in orchestral music, and it should only be used very sparingly, and that composers didn't indicate when to use it. All of these things that these people talk about, which is just complete crap. And you should just be aware of that. This is one of those pieces that gives us really irrefutable evidence that composers were very, very concerned with regulating the level of vibrato, meaning the level of expression, of expressivity in their music, over a very, very wide continuum, from virtually nothing to lots and lots and lots and everything in between. And here's one of the really wonderful indications of that happening before our very ears. So, after the slow movement, there's a minuet with a middle section called a trio. We're not going to play the minuet. It's very, very charming, and it does the opposite of what the first movement does. It emphasizes that 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, so that it's a much more rhythmically normal piece of music than the first movement was. And Haydn isn't concerned at all with trying to defeat our view, our feeling of being in triple time. It's a lovely movement, and you may think that the first theme, by the way, of the minuet is sort of related to the Schoolmaster theme, and it kind of is. I mean, there are these resemblances in Haydn symphonies, and he uses them as a way to bind the music together. But I want to play you. I don't want to do the minuet because I want to play you the entire finale, which is over 4 minutes long. This is delicious. And it's one of those finales that absolutely binds the whole symphony together. Why? Because it's a rondo. Now, a rondo is a piece of music that has a theme. That theme usually has the structure of a variation theme, that is, 2 halves, both repeated, separated by episodes. And then it comes back. The theme is called a ritornello because it keeps returning. And the normal rondo sequence is A, B, A, C, A. Isn't that simple? And B is a contrasting theme. C is a contrasting episode, often in a minor key for maximum contrast and a little turbulence and angst, which is what happens here. And then the rondo theme returns. And in this case, there's a coda in addition, which consists of further variations because, and here's the kicker, this is the pièce de résistance. The kicker is that the rondo isn't just a normal rondo, it's a variation rondo. What does that mean? Well, what that means is that every time the A section, the ritornello, comes back, it comes back in the form of a variation, as we heard in the Schoolmaster movement, that is, which was a theme and variations in its entirety. So Haydn has a finale which gives us the variation concept, and it also gives everybody in the orchestra an opportunity to show off. Because the first episode, the B episode, is for nothing but woodwinds. That's 2 bassoons, 2 oboes, and 2 horns. It's delightful. And like I said, the second episode, the C episode, is in a minor key. And then at the very, very end, you hear the oboes, then the horns. The whole orchestra gets something to do. That's very typical of Haydn also. In the trio of the minuet, you have a solo cello with violins on top. He always wants to give his players an opportunity to show off. In the 20th century, composers invented something called the concerto for orchestra, which they didn't want to call a symphony, but it had the concept was to write a piece for orchestra that gave every section and individuals something to do, something to display, that kind of, solo opportunity. Well, Haydn was doing that 200 years earlier. And this symphony is a concerto for orchestra in a very real sense as well. But this finale, with its combination of variation form and rondo form, is just the perfect capstone to an absolutely delicious symphony, which is so original, but at the same time, it's so entirely typical of what Haydn does, of who he is, of how he thinks. And that's why it's one of the more popular symphonies. That and the nickname, of course, gives it a certain identity. But it's so much more fun if you know what that identity means, isn't it? And if you know how the performers are supposed to realize that identity in the course of the movement. So let's listen to the entire finale and wrap things up with Symphony number 55, Der Schulmeister. Here it is. Unbelievable. Variations, concerto-like solos. It's just amazing. Haydn just, I just sweat listening to him. He's so full of invention all the time, and he's so smart in the way he plans his symphonies and lets us hear what he's doing. That's the point. There are no tricks here, just joy and delight. So keep on listening, friends. Thanks so much for joining me. I'll see you next time for Symphony number 56. Take care.